Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Londeen. I'm a senior data engineering consultant here at Axis Group. And I'm going to be presenting today on metadata-driven data flows. This is a pattern that helps you scale your 1 or 2 pipelines to 10,000 without needing to scale your team to 10,000 developers. It gives your data pipelines and your team superpowers. So with that, let's dive in. Axis Group is a data analytics consulting firm. We do the end-to-end from data management, data governance, all the way to the end user with our BI dashboards. We've been in business for over 25 years. We have over 100 consultants with a collective hundreds of years of experience in analytics, operations, and enablement. We have over 100 active customers now, and we've had hundreds of customers over the years. One thing we're really proud of is our customers, on average, see 30% higher effective adoption of data analytics and BI through our engagements. So next up, a little bit about me. I'm a data engineering consultant. I've been in data engineering for about 5 years now. I've been in the technology industry for about 15 years, doing all sorts of things from software development, database administration, sysadmin, all over the place. Some of my hobbies are family. I love good beer. And I also spend a lot of time on my home lab. I got my own little personal data center that me and a few friends use. Some of my recent projects are all over the place, from streaming big data analysis, DevOps, infrastructure as code, some Kubernetes migrations, data platform builds, a lot of interesting stuff over the past couple of years. One last thing before we get into it, a little shameless plug. I helped co-author a little white paper. You can get it at this link. It is a guide to modern data architecture. So while this is a small piece of that, in the ebook, we cover the whole platform and data architecture and kind of our take on what modern data architecture looks like. I'm going to kick it off with what is metadata-driven data flows and how does it work? Then we're going to get into the why you do it, why your team should invest in it, from the developer level or even at the program level. Then we're getting into the how. And then, fingers crossed, we're going to have a really cool demo at the end to show you a very basic way to get started. All right, so what is MDD? I'm going to be using that acronym for a while, but it's just metadata-driven data flows. At its core, metadata-driven data flows is a pattern used to simplify pipeline development, deployment, and management. So it's a combination of just our data pipelines we use every day and the metadata. What does that look like under the hood? Well, at its core, there's 2 pieces, right? You need templated data flows, which are kind of your data pipelines, and we need metadata. That's where you get started, and at its core, that's all you really need. When you get started, you'll have some implementation of the orchestration, the interface, and the observability. But it's important to note we should treat each of these as separate work streams. Start small, continuously improve over time. Once we move towards maybe some more complex metadata-driven orchestration, you're going to need some maturity in each of these areas. I'll kind of walk through what each looks like through the course of this presentation, but orchestration is kind of decoupling the what a pipeline is from the how, and decoupling the what and the why and the when, right? We're able to kind of orchestrate many pipelines. Our interface is kind of like how we interact with the system overall. This could be a database or a REST interface. And observability is kind of the logging, the telemetry, and everything that we use to develop SLAs around our data platforms. It's also what we use to know that our systems are healthy and how to solve problems in case one should occur. So why use metadata-driven development? What's wrong with what we're doing today? I'm going to focus on 4 main pillars. So first off is risk reduction. So metadata-driven development allows us to kind of decouple our systems. It makes it easier to swap in and out components. Swapping out a database we're using upstream, that could be, where normally that might be a heavy lift. Using MDD, that could be just changing a couple fields in a table. It could also be swapping out our entire orchestration system. Let's say we move from Airflow to stream sets. We can do that much easier if we've already encapsulated all of our other parameters into a metadata repo. Next up is optimization. So metadata-driven development is going to force us, rather than building one-off code, it's going to push our developers towards templated approaches and coming up with a kind of common consolidated code base. It's also going to increase our time to value. We're normally creating a new data pipeline to connect an end user to a data set. It could take weeks. With metadata-driven development, it could simply be adding an extra row to a table and changing a couple parameters. It could take minutes. If we get mature enough with our metadata-driven development, we can also create systems that allow business users to create pipelines ad hoc by entering in a couple values into a form, taking our data delivery from weeks to minutes. Next up is scalability. So it allows our team to scale and manage, monitor, and deliver more pipelines because the shape of the work is changing. We're not building one-off pipelines anymore. We're getting more around managing metadata and improving our data platform and system. Last up is automation. At the end of the day, we're talking about less keystrokes, less clicks, and less human intervention. And that leads to less headaches and heartbreaks down the road. So what are some good use cases? When do I know that MDD is a good fit for me? First off, maybe you're doing a cloud data lake migration. That's one I've commonly used. We've got many data sets in, let's say, our Hadoop, and we want to move it to Google Cloud. This is a great fit because we can create a couple of pipeline templates and come up with the parameters, which would be our source and destinations, and generate thousands of pipelines, or however many data sets you might have. Next up is complex orchestration. This is where we start getting more towards metadata-driven orchestration. We have a lot of pipelines and we're having a hard time managing them. MDD can be a great approach to getting some sanity to our system. Last up is, let's say we're scaling a small team. Let's say we know that we're having some problems on the resource issue. And rather than hiring 1,000 more developers, maybe we can just have a different approach. We can use metadata-driven development to scale the work that our teams are able to do without having to scale the team. Now, here's the big question. How do we actually do it? Before we get into the how, I want to say there's two kind of types. I'm dividing it into a single scaled pipeline. This is where we might have a bunch of data sets, but we don't have a bunch of different types of logic in between. Let's say we're just moving our data from place to place. Or maybe we just want a single developer. I'm just a single developer and I want to be able to scale how many pipelines I can create. So this is one type. The other type is metadata-driven orchestration. This is where we're actually creating a larger system. It's worth noting, I'm going to demo this one later and then maybe show an architecture diagram of what this looks like to help it make a little more sense. So let's look at the first one, a single scale pipeline. There's only two pieces here. First, we have some pipelines and we have some metadata. Essentially, the process here is we're going to take the pipelines we have today and we're going to parameterize them. And we're going to take those parameters or variables or configuration, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to consolidate that into some kind of metadata repo. This will allow us to take those templates and scale it out to many pipelines from just a couple of lines of code, maybe over here. This is metadata-driven orchestration. There's a lot more to this and a lot more maturity, but essentially what we have is we have some kind of interface that drives our system. This is our main point of management and development. That's going to feed and interact with our metadata repo. These are a little more tightly coupled. Often our metadata repo will be some sort of database, and often That's going to be our main point of interaction. If we want to build a new pipeline, we'll add a new row to our metadata repo. Maybe we're using a GitOps approach and we're actually committing our metadata to some sort of Git repo. Our main interface then is going to be Git, and we're just going to commit new metadata to our metadata repo to create new pipelines. If we want to edit or swap out different parameters, we're going to be doing that through a common interface. And in the most mature case, maybe we have some kind of service-oriented architecture, and we're allowing business users to interact with our metadata from, maybe some sophisticated app or web UI. This metadata is going to feed into our pipelines or pipeline engine, which, this could be stream sets, this could be a bunch of Spark jobs or Python jobs, could be Azure Data Factory or something like that. We're essentially going to have this repository of templates. We're going to orchestrate those templates and feed in metadata at runtime to generate the individual jobs. And lastly, we have the observability component. Now, you're going to get this in many places, maybe in our metadata repo, maybe in our pipeline engine. Let's say we're using stream sets here. That's going to give us a lot of observability for free. Let's say we're orchestrating all that through Airflow. That means some of our observability data is going to be trapped in that system as well. The point here is we want to try to, as much as possible, centralize our observability data, and that's going to allow us to maintain our overall system better. So how do I get started? Let's say I have a few pipelines already. What do I do? Where do I begin? So first off, we're going to take a look and inventory at all of our pipelines and at our data ecosystem. We're going to try to find, we're going to go through the process of genericizing our jobs. We're going to find the common core logic between all of our pipelines, turn those into templates. We're going to take note of our parameters that we need to drive those templates. And that's what's going to help us build our metadata repo. Next up is we gotta figure out how we're going to orchestrate all this. What's going to actually generate the individual pipelines and jobs that run. We also need to start thinking about how are we going to schedule and trigger these jobs. Are we just doing scheduled batch? Are we using some kind of event-driven system? Next up is our metadata repo. We've got to pick where we're going to store our metadata, whether that be any of the systems I mentioned today. We also need to kind of think about how we're going to interface with that metadata. And then lastly, we're going to take all the parameters from our existing pipelines. We're going to feed that into our metadata repo, then kind of wire everything up. The last step is observability. We want to figure out a way to centralize our logging and monitoring. Definitely start small. Start with just some simple monitoring like heart beating, maybe some simple SLAs like mean time to recovery when our pipelines fail, and definitely the kind of the info and the logging about our pipeline runs. From there, we're going to continuously improve, come up with more advanced telemetry, and also work with our upstream and downstream partners to come up with meaningful KPIs and SLAs that tell us that our systems are running good, our downstream consumers and upstream sources are happy with us. And with that, demo time. It's time to blow your minds with a real example of a metadata-driven data flow. So I'm going to hop over to one of my favorite data engineering tools, and we'll show you how this is done. So you can see here I've got a dead simple pipeline. We're just moving data from one place to another. But you can see what I've done here is I've come up with a couple of parameters. We've got a source directory in our source system, and we've got a destination directory in our target system. Now I'm going to need you to use your imagination here a little bit. We could have any type of complex logic in between. But the important part is we parameterized some of our configuration. Now, in this case, if you're familiar with stream sets, this might just look like a pipeline, but you'll know this is actually a pipeline template. We can use this template to drive the creation of many pipelines. I'll show you what that looks like. So this is kind of the early beginnings, but we have those parameters I called out earlier. We can configure those here. We can add as many instances as we want. This allows us to create potentially hundreds or thousands of pipelines using the same logic. And then we can use our orchestration tool, in this case, stream sets, and our observability, which we also get from stream sets, to manage and monitor these jobs. Now, this is a very simple example. It gets much more complex. We obviously don't want to be hand tuning and filling these out each time. Typically, what you would do is you would have some automated process to generate these upstream, and we'd feed these into a template to create our hundreds or thousands of jobs. All right, that's the simple example. That's how it works on day one. Let's take a look at what this might look like in a future, complicated state. You can see this is a much more complex architecture. We've got, batch, we've got some streaming going on. We've got all kinds of downstream users of our data. You can see we have this orchestration layer at the top. This is once we get, and this is what it looks like once we get into metadata-driven orchestration. We're going to have some kind of metadata repo, could be Azure, some kind of Azure database or something. That's going to feed into our orchestration engine. This could be a Prefect or Airflow or stream sets, and that's going to help us orchestrate all of this data movement we see below through potentially many systems before it gets to our end users. Next up, how does DataOps and metadata-driven data flows interact? There's a lot of similarities and a lot of things that metadata-driven development and DataOps have in common. For one, the version controlled data pipelines, and code base in the development, the orchestration piece and the observability and the containerization. These are all very important aspects in DataOps. You're going to get those. You can see metadata-driven development is very compatible in a lot of these verticals. Last up, a little bonus section on some lessons I've learned along the way. Definitely pick the right tool for the job. You want to consider the capabilities of the team you're working with. If you don't have a bunch of hardcore Python users, don't custom build your own metadata-driven framework. Use a tool that can give them a leg up. You definitely want to understand the complexity of your upstream users, right? Start with the users first. Don't just kind of build a platform and try to fit their use cases to some elaborate system you've built. Gather requirements from the actual use cases and start there. Definitely know that there's a big difference between streaming and batch, and there's a lot of complexity in each that you need to carefully consider, and you need to build into your platform. Make sure it can kind of handle both if that's a need. And lastly, testing and observability. This will save you a lot of lost weekends. If you can gain some maturity, especially in testing, it's going to save you a lot of time down the road. The observability front, things break. Distributed systems are hard. Data engineering is hard. Anyone who tells you it's not is lying to you. Things are going to break over time. And observability, that telemetry you're gathering, is going to help you respond to problems and be able to actually meet the SLAs that you've built and that trust you built with your upstream and downstream partners. Thanks everyone for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Access Group.